Late last night, Nigeria's elections management body, INEC, released a statement to inform the public of the postponement of the gubernatorial and state national assembly elections. This decision was hinged upon a court ruling giving them the nod to reconfigure the voting machine termed as BVAS that was used for the presidential elections. Now, according to INEC's statement, there isn't enough time to complete the process for what should have been Saturday's elections. INEC says the elections will now be held on March 18th, a week after its original date. This latest development is coming on the back of a tightly contested presidential election that two of the candidates say was a flawed process. The aggrieved parties have since flocked to the courts, where they secured orders to conduct a forensic audit of the results and logistics, including the voting machine. Let's get more understanding of this and its likely implications. My name is Kemini Amano, and you're welcome to The Square. Joining our gathering today are Dean Abasi Ayorinde Asian, his partner at Adrem Partners, Nottingham, United Kingdom. We are also joined by Bartholomew Agwegbodo. He's chairman of the Nigerian Bar Association, Ikeja branch. He's based in Lagos, Nigeria. And then we have Shina Lorimikan. He's convener for Campaign Against Impunity in Nigeria. Gentlemen, you're welcome to The Square.
Thank you.
I'll start off with you, Dina Bassi. Were there any surprises in the ruling and, the subsequent outcome from INEC, as far as you're concerned?
If I may just say for a start that the importance of the BVAS machines to the electoral process, according to our new Electoral Act, which was passed in 2022, cannot be understated. According to the information available on INEC's very own website, the BVAS machines are not just simply for verification of the voters and accreditation, but also for the transmission of the results. And based on that alone, you must agree that they are the crux of the entire process. If we don't have these BVAS machines properly calibrated and are not available for these elections, then we know that we're essentially going to go back to our typical performance in previous times with the manual collation and transmission of results, which, as we very know, is very susceptible to alteration and deviation from the actual facts of the result. So for that reason alone, I think it's quite important that we accept this decision in good faith and believe that INEC is seeking this extra time to go ahead to give us the best possible elections in the circumstances.
Indeed. Shina, I'd like to hear your thoughts on events of the last few hours, from the court ruling and then to INEC's decision to postpone the elections. Shina, we can barely hear you. Well, my understanding is we do not have Shina yet. So let's move on to Bartholomew then. Bartholomew, give us a legal breakdown of how this postponement came to be. How did we get to this point?
Before I get into the response to the question you asked, let me first of all set the record straight. During your introductory part, you introduced me as the chairman, MBA Ikeja branch. I am the immediate past chairman of the MBA Ikeja branch and not the incumbent chairman. Having said that, now to the question you asked, the legal angle. The order of court was made earlier allowing Peter Obi, the presidential candidate of Labour Party, to inspect the BVAS and all necessary materials to prepare for his challenge of the election result. INEC knew beforehand that there was a week in between both elections, and INEC already made regulations prior to the presidential election allowing parties who will raise such queries. So ordinarily, INEC wasn't prepared for the challenge and the subsequent postponement they gave. When INEC gave the schedules of election, they knew there would be possible challenges. So they did not prepare for it. Now, as to obeying the court orders, I must have to say, I salute the courage of the justices who gave the ruling yesterday to the effect that, yes, INEC, you have to reconfigure. But before you reconfigure, there must be need that the data and the information contained in the BVAS are certified, are gotten by the parties who need them. If that is not done, what it ultimately means is that evidence that ought to be used for the tribunal contest will have been manipulated or probably erased. So looking at it from that very angle, I think it is a welcome ruling from our judiciary. Now, INEC is only trying to justify the request they made to be allowed to configure by actually extending by 1 week. Because as at the time they conducted the presidential election, they ought to know that the same BVAS, because I raised the question personally and I asked, what are we reconfiguring in the BVAS that will delay the election? If truth must be told, the BVAS is used for accreditation. The same persons who voted for the presidential election are the same persons that are likely to come back to vote for the governorship election. So why do we necessarily need the reconfiguration of the BVAS there? The information in the BVAS could actually be stored in the cloud. So if those information is stored in the cloud, why the reconfiguration? But having said that, if INEC deems it fit not to have an excuse to say that the election was not properly prepared for and they asked for a week, I think it is only fair that the 1 week is given to them and we'll get it right.
Would you consider this? And Bartholomew, I'm staying with you. And indeed, let me also mention, before I go any further, that I apologize for getting your designation wrong. But on other matters, would you consider this an indictment of on INEC, given that, again, they should have had foresight of this? They had already given room for within which period people should raise any discontent or even litigation if the need arise. They also knew at the same time that they would have to, as they tell us, reconfigure their devices for the next phase of the election, which was also scheduled for a week after the presidential election. I mean, what does this say about the thought process, again, at INEC?
I readily pointed out that it only points to the fact that INEC is ill-prepared for the election. In my earlier comment, I pointed it out that INEC knew 4 years ago that there will be a gubernatorial and state house assemblies election after the presidential election. In their wisdom, they scheduled this timetable and said they will hold the election a week before. So coming at this very time to now say, oh, we need more time to reconfigure, we do not have enough time, is only laying credence to the fact that INEC is ill-prepared for the election. But like I said earlier, they asked for 1 week. Let us not be like the tortoise that have been in the shithole for years and is told that they will leave the shithole tomorrow morning and it begins to grumble, saying, oh, I've been here, it's really stinking. If INEC is asking for 1 week to get it right, it is better we'll all bear the pain for the next 1 week than having a more terrible election than the one we had on the 25th of February.
What I was driving at was whether or not this could have been done differently. But I'll come back to you for that. Let me move on to Dean now. Dean, we've had the word reconfigure bandied around a lot. The INEC has spoken about it. Journalists have regurgitated it. We've had the courts also use the same word. But really, there seemed to be very little understanding of exactly what it means to reconfigure the voting machines BVAS. What understanding do you have about this?
I didn't quite get all of your question, but if I may just take us back a little bit as to the issue of the conduct of the elections and postponement. According to the Electoral Act 2022, Section 24, subsection 2, when a date has been appointed for the holding of an election and there is reason to believe that a serious breach of the peace is likely to occur if the election is proceeded with on that date, or if it is impossible to conduct the election on that day as a result of natural disasters or any other kind of emergencies, INEC has the power to postpone elections to another date, provided that the reason for such postponement is cogent and verifiable. I would argue that a a court order delaying, I think, previous distribution of the BVAS machines nationwide, because if I'm not mistaken, we are supposed to have gubernatorial elections in 31 states on Saturday prior to this postponement. And of course, then you have the state houses of assembly. So with that being said, INEC taking a week, considering that this ruling was only passed down yesterday on Wednesday, when we know that these roughly about 150,000 BVAS machines will have to be distributed to 150,000 polling units for Saturday morning at 8:30 when the election was supposed to commence, is reasonable in the circumstances, considering that if that ruling did not go in their favor, they would have had to have availed the petitioners in these cases of the BVAS machines. So I understand my learned, most likely senior counsel's position on ill preparedness, but I think that in the circumstances, considering how I would say widely denounced the fairness and openness of the previous elections for the presidency were previous weekend, it is right that INEC is kind of taking a step back to try and make there be at least an appearance of justice. So if we are to consider that with justice is supposed to be, justice should not only be done, but should be seen to be done. INEC is kind of taking a position that is in line with that very, very old, I think from 1924 by Lord Hewitt in Rex and Sussex Justices, very old principle. Now, moving on to the reconfiguration. Reconfiguration at this point in time is not a process or concept that we're all very familiar with as it relates to the BVAS. This is their first usage. This information that is contained on the BVAS is said to be being backed up to the INEC servers. However, if we are to assume that there is a manual procedure, or at least a manual check to confirm that it has been reconfigured, it is, I think, well advised that we allow them this opportunity to show us that the system actually works for the greater good of the country. If we are to have a repeat of the last weekend's elections where people were reportedly not able to access the BVAS, or some of the officers at the polling unit said that they didn't have the logging information or transmission information, it could result in widespread unrest. So I think that's what I think is going on here. It's more of a situation of erring on the side of caution.
But let me ask you the same question. Do we have any understanding of the scope of reconfiguration that INEC hopes to conduct or perform on their BVAS machines?
The truth remains that the introduction of IT in our election process is a new thing in our electoral process in Nigeria here. And the language of reconfiguring the BVAS machine is novel. My understanding of it is that the machine is at the first point where it was used for the presidential election. INEC gave all the assurances that the BVAS machine was ready to go for the election. Now, the idea of having to do reconfiguration in the middle of an election process can only best be explained if INEC present clearer picture of what they mean by reconfiguring the BVAS machine. The general understanding there is that the machine itself, from the very inception, in the 4 years preparation leading to this election, is ready for the election. No clear reason has been given why the BVAS machine requires configuration. But all the same, again, like I pointed out in my earlier comment, if INEC believes honestly that they need to reconfigure the BVAS machine to give a better outcome in the next election, which is the gubernatorial election, I think it's only fair and square that the 1 week they ask for, it will be sufficient, be given to INEC. But as to the concept of the reconfiguration of the BVAS, I do not think we'll have a clearer picture of that out there.
I see. And perhaps, the ball is in INEC's court to want to explain to the public what reconfiguration is in the name of trust. And speaking of trust, we'll touch on it in a bit. But Dean, let's talk about this latest development a bit more. What could the consequences be, or what are the implications for the litigating parties, if any at all?
the last part of your question, pardon me. Please, could you repeat it?
Absolutely. I was asking, what are the implications for the litigating parties, if any at all?
Well, in terms of the BVAS machines for these litigants, the court has given, I think, a two-sided ruling. The first ruling was that, okay, first of all, you've already been granted by the court to your previous prayers of inspection and certified true copies of the information contained in these BVAS machines. And then, of course, as well, on Wednesday, the court said, look, INEC, you need to give them access to these machines so that they can go ahead and examine the data therewith and have copies of it. Now, with the second side of whether or not it's going to influence the litigation process going forward, I think it's massively going to influence the process. I was fortunate enough to be part of the election petition team for Atiku, seconded to Emeka Etiaba SEN, my former principal, who works out of Abuja. And I must say that the actual process previously for presidential election petitions, looking at the Form EC8A forms and all that, is very, very tedious, and it's a difficult process to go through within the time constraints of our election petition jurisprudence. So with BVAS, I think it will be able to, I think BVAS, which is also linked to the IREV, which is the INEC results website, where it's uploading the information in real time, will give a better opportunity for more accurate figures and more accurate, I would say, a more seamless way of actually comparing what has been announced with what was genuinely recorded. So I think there will be a heavy reliance on it going forward for litigation. And I think even in the upcoming gubernatorial elections or gubernatorial elections as they may be, you find that litigation will revolve around what information those BVAS machines contain. If the intention of INEC is to have anything other than a free and fair election, I think they will be ill-advised to continue with the BVAS system. So if it's seen as it has been passed into law and the BVAS is now here to stay, I think we can look forward to some very interesting approaches from senior counsel like my colleague on the other end and the various senior advocates of Nigeria applying their field at the moment, trying to petition at these elections.
Well, Bartholomew, would you expect the litigating parties in this, election petition case do anything at this point? And if so, what would that be?
The introduction of BVAS, looking vis-a-vis the timeline for conclusion of election petition matters, which is 180 days, will ease the burden on litigating counsels, considering the fact of the volume of materials they had to go through. Interestingly, the ruling of the court will impact positively on the outcome of the elections, because if the information contained in the BVAS are certified before the configuration, what it simply means is that it gives in real time opportunity for the litigating counsels to compare what was declared by INEC with what was generated from the BVAS. So a situation where what INEC declared is different from what was generated from the polling units as uploaded on the BVAS or on the IRF, it makes the job easier for litigators to actually prove that there are glaring irregularities. And that will also help the work of courts. If you compare that with the former situation where you have to go through bundles of Form E08 and all that, and you look at how many witnesses you need to call, the electoral jurisprudence requires that you don't need just to prove that there's irregularity. You need to prove widespread irregularity that affects the outcome of the result. And doing that manually becomes a very tedious job that's almost an impossibility to achieve. So I think the introduction of BVAS will make the job far easier to achieve. And as long as it is not tampered with and continue with BVAS, there will be minimal room for election malpractices.
So let's talk about that trust. As you said, as long as it's not manipulated. And even in terms of technology, you wouldn't have to worry only about manipulation. We'd also have to talk about the fact that this could also result in corrupted data as you're transferring into storage, and so again, how can INEC build that trust, not only with the litigating parties, but also with the voters, so that this does not degenerate into something else. Bartholomew, what would you say?
I will say straight that if on the 25th of February, when the presidential election took place, that the uploading of the result had been seamless from the polling units straight to the INEC server, I tell you that we wouldn't have had this kind of challenges we are faced with. But the situation where even uploading from the BVAS to the INEC server became a problem, that leads to a breach of trust, that people now started suspecting that something untoward is about to happen or has taken place. My own take is very straight there. For INEC to build that already damaged trust between INEC and the populace will be at a remedial situation in the forthcoming gubernatorial election, where people's wishes are meant to be reflected, irrespective of who wins the election at the end of the day.
When we come back, we'll talk more about this particular subject of trust. Stay with us here on The Square. Welcome back to Village Square Africa. Today we are discussing the latest developments surrounding Nigeria's phase 2 of the 2023 elections. And with me are Dean Abasi Ayorinde AC and his partner at Adrem Partners in Nottingham, United Kingdom. We also have Bartholomew Agwegbodo. He is former chairman of the Nigerian Bar Association Ikeja branch. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your patience. And Dean, that brings me to you on the same subject of trust. There could be trust issues here with the parties. There could be trust issues here also with voters, given what is perceived to have happened and what may have happened in the 2023 presidential elections. So talk to us about, how INEC can rebuild that trust.
I think I previously touched on trust slightly, but once again, let me go back to this good old aphorism that we were taught in university when we were studying law. And it was, it's not merely of some importance, but of fundamental importance that justice should not only be done, but should be seen manifestly and undoubtedly to be done. And that is, to cut a long story short, if I am sitting as justice or judge on a matter, and I have an interest in the matter, I am expected to recuse myself. It doesn't mean that I am not going to pass justice because I am involved, but the perception is that if I give a verdict in favor of the person who I know, that person somehow must have manipulated me to give that judgment. Now, with INEC, we have to have trust, because this electoral process, I think the manifest destinies of over 100 million Nigerians rely upon the judgment that INEC gives as to who the winner of these elections are. Now, at the end of the day, the best way for INEC to go ahead to make sure that people believe and trust them is to be very transparent. Transparency is always the best way to build trust. If INEC comes out and explains the intricacies, or at least in layman's terms, that the average Nigerian can understand, surrounding the recalibration of these BVAS machines, which I think to some extent I have done my own research, and I understand that the summary of the arguments in court is that the information as to who has been accredited or not accredited is what they want to wipe off, so that it can be a fresh set of accreditation for these gubernatorial elections and state house elections. But in general, if this information is made widely public, I think it will give a greater understanding as to why the additional time is required, as well as ensuring that regardless of whatever the outcome may be, that these results are transmitted in real time. The whole premise of the massive expenditure that the government put out and the massive outlay of resources to have these BVAS machines and to change the system, essentially, was so that we could have real-time results. It was very disheartening that during the presidential elections, at a certain point in time, the results stopped being transmitted. And then subsequently, if you look at the results as have been collated on IREF, there's a discrepancy, at least in terms of the total votes cast in and the allocation of the same in Lagos State. I think to the tune of about 800,000 votes between Peter Obi and our President-elect Bola Ahmed Tinubu. So these are the issues that we are facing, and these are the issues that are leaving Nigerians largely disgruntled. I appreciate that INEC has to, be on a certain timeline and get these things done. However, it's more important, I think, that the elections are perceived as free and fair so that everyone is willing to accept them than for timelines to be met.
Very well.
That's my opinion.
Just a final one on the technology that is being used. In this day and age, could INEC have used a better technology in that, a better technology in the sense that one that would not require that you now have to take a break and store, the information on it on your service before you can move on to the next stage of your elections? What do you think about that?
Well, I wouldn't call myself an expert on servers. However, I do know that typically Nigeria has proven itself in the last 5 years in particular, to be very much at the edge of technological advancement. We have several successful unicorns. We have several successful tech startups. In fact, we've had reason to reward and award some of those people who have gone ahead and put our country on the map in terms of technology and these apps. I would believe that in-house, within those number of people who are so qualified, that they could have found a system that would enable automatic uploads, not just to the IREV website, but also to this backup server, so that you get it being uploaded at the same time to both of these servers. However, the choices were made. I would not like to say corners were cut. However, we do know that we have a reputation for cutting corners when it comes to doing the right thing.
I see.
I can only hope that we take ourselves forward from this particular electoral cycle with the new authorities that will be set in the Court of Appeal and subsequently in the Supreme Court, based on the results that will inevitably go to trial in a week or 2 weeks' time.
Very well. Now let's move ahead onto the March 18th gubernatorial and state national assembly elections. When we look back at the presidential elections, and Bartholomew, I'm coming to you on this one. We know that there were happenings, both perceived and real, that raised concerns about the conduct of the elections, not only of INEC, but also of supportive behaviors on the side of the parties. Looking forward into March 18th, let's start off with INEC. What are the lessons that you hope that INEC would have learned, in conducting the March 18th elections?
Conducting the March 18th election, INEC will have probably picked a lesson or two from the fact that some of the officers were not well trained to use the BVAS. And the second part of it is the issue of arrival of election materials to polling units. INEC admitted itself that materials did not get to the polling units on time, and that affected the performance. I want to believe that going into the proposed March 18 election for gubernatorial and House of Assembly candidates, that INEC will ensure that the electoral materials are distributed on time and they get to the polling units as earliest as possible. Then on the use of the technology itself, INEC should ensure that we do not have a repeat of the inability to upload the election results from the polling units to the INEC server. If it repeats again, we'll fear there may be a massive breakdown of law and order, going by what has happened in the last presidential election. So I think if INEC will have to build on what the flaws, if they have to build positively from the flaws of the February 25th election, INEC will have to look into the issue of these two issues, ensuring that the technology deployed works effectively, ensuring that the personnel assigned with the duties of operating them are properly informed about its uses, and ensuring that these materials get to the polling units as and when due.
Very well. How about the supporter base of these political parties that will be contesting in the elections? What would you have to say to them as far as their own conduct is concerned?
I think the election in Nigeria is more or less a do or die affair. But having said that, I think it behooves on the body language of the candidates running the election to call their support base to order. One would have imagined if, for instance, after the declaration of the president-elect Bola Ahmed Tinubu as the president-elect, if the presidential candidate of the Labour Party had been blowing hot, saying, no, this is unacceptable, we'll fight this, there will have been massive breakdown of law and order nationwide. So I think the candidates themselves will have to call their support base to order that this is a call to serve. And a call to serve requires a lot of sacrifice. And I do not see it as a matter that will degenerate into a do or die affair that will lead to loss of lives.
I see. Dean, do you expect any kind of voter apathy going into the March 18th elections, given the very recent history?
Expectation had been before yesterday that there will be voters' apathy, because it is one thing for voters to turn out en masse the way they did on the 25th of February to express their desire.
Indeed.
And the outcome of it didn't go out.
Very Bartholomew. I can hear you, but that question was for Dean, so I'll have Dean take it and I'll come back to you.
So yes, do I predict voter apathy? I suppose that a lot of first-time voters in the immediate past elections would be rather disgruntled as to how things turned out. However, personally, I would encourage them to exercise their vote. We are well aware that there was unfortunately still an attempt at voter suppression. There was an attempt at rigging. There was an attempt at, I would say, various abuses of office and power, political power, by certain members of the executive. I will refrain from mentioning them by name at this point in time. However, once again, they should remain encouraged, because at least we have seen from the what we'll call the delayed uploads to the IREV that your vote will count. It will count in the long term. I believe in the judicial process. I believe that at this point in time, the eyes of Africa and to a larger extent the world at large are on our judiciary to see how they conduct themselves in these election petitions. So, barring any failure to actually have the elections on the 18th and a further postponement, I expect that, albeit with some margin of voter apathy, there should still be a reasonable turnout for these elections. Particularly, I think in states where there are quite divisive candidates, that the candidates have very polarizing points of view. I think, for example, we can look at Lagos State. I expect that there will be a very, very, very strong turnout of
much more than in the presidential election.
Yes, much more than even the presidential election. I think some people have been encouraged by seeing what happened with the presidential election and the actual votes that were reported. If we factor in that Peter Obi was given, albeit as a victim of widespread rigging, 6.1 million votes. Atiku was given 6.8 million votes, and Bola Ahmed Tinubu was given 8.2 million votes, or so, 8.6. That's quite a significant number. If you look at the numbers that came out of Lagos State, even with all the discrepancies, we still had over 1 million voters. So if those numbers are repeated or even increased, we can see quite an interesting outcome, I hope, from Lagos State. So
very well. And again, Dean, we'll probably just wait for the courts to, give a nod to whether or not there was rigging, wouldn't we? In the meantime, I'll move the conversation on to Bartholomew. Bartholomew, you were making your point on whether or not there could be voter apathy given the events of the last few weeks.
Yeah, I said ordinarily, one would have expected a voter apathy given the events of last 25th of February. But in a state like Lagos and Rivers, where there has been a lot of happenings in the last 1 week, rather than experience voter apathy in these elections, it would ginger more persons those who didn't vote in the initial election of February 25 to turn out and vote and exercise their vote on one side or one way or the other. One thing is actually very evident in the governorship election. In the national election, which is the presidential election that took place on the 25th of February, the awareness that the election result had generated and the polarity it has created between sides since the 25th of February and even awakened consciousness, political consciousness in people who felt that it never mattered, to now see, oh, that the votes can actually count using the BVAS. And we expect that going by that, we may have more voters turnout than we had in the February 25th presidential election.
I see. I come back to you now, Dean. Let's talk about security. We know that until the announcement that the election had been postponed, the police commissioners around the country had been, told to ensure that security is at its top-notch level at the voting centers. Now it's been postponed. We really don't know the plan. If you were to give any advice to our security personnel, what would it be, given what we have seen in the last election?
I will refer specifically once again to Lagos State, which I think for a lot of us was a key state in the last presidential election. There were eyewitness reports, and I personally watched footage of would-be voters getting assaulted or chased. And I specifically in one video, there was a fully armed, a fully dressed police officer standing right there at the polling unit while this was going on. I think there was another incident where an APC polling unit agent was basically warning and threatening would-be voters that if they were not going to be voting for APC, they should return home. So I think his name is Ben Hundeyin, who happens to be the police PPR for Lagos State or so, came out to say that, well, in the circumstances, what did they expect the police officer to do, that he could have been attacked? And I think that was just very disappointing. So I think in these circumstances, I would encourage all the police commissioners to please take this matter seriously, to please stand up for Nigerians as a whole, because at the end of the day, a Nigeria that works for one works for all. If you, as the head of the police, encourage your officers to go out there and actually maintain law and order, as opposed to stand idly by while people's votes are purchased or people perform any kind of electoral malfeasance or malpractice, we are much more likely to have free and fair elections, and we're less likely to have any kind of crises following the completion of the electoral process.
Very well. Bartholomew, you have the last word on this one. With the postponement now, we know it means that the electoral process has been extended by a whole week, which means that campaigns can go on until midnight a week from today. So I wanted to speak to these candidates, particularly those in the governorship race, about how to use this period to talk to their base so we can have an incident-free gubernatorial election.
Like I pointed out in my last comment, the aspirants, particularly the candidates, particularly for the gubernatorial election, have a higher duty and a higher responsibility resting on them to talk to their fan base that this is a question of a people expressing their choice. And it does not need to go down the violent way. We've had incidents of threats, particularly in Lagos, where we're all based here, to the effect that, oh, if you don't do this, this will happen. I do not think it is healthy for a candidate who intends to serve. He should be seen as being able to have a control over his fan base. For me, personally, my opinion, a candidate who cannot control his fan base is not even what the office is vying for. For everybody who is a leader and a born leader should be able to control his fan base. So any of the aspirants or all the aspirants in the race should be able to control their fan base if we are going to have a rancor-free election.
Indeed. Gentlemen,
if we take a case in point in 2015, when the presidential candidates of the PDP lost the election, people were waiting for Goodluck Ebele Jonathan, as then was the president, to actually reject the result, and Nigeria will go up in flames. But his comment that election is not one blood will be shed on his behalf because of the election. And if you look at the process, the 2015 general election that brought in the president Muhammadu Buhari's administration into power had less election petitions than all previous elections conducted.
Indeed, gentlemen, I'm grateful for your time here on the square. Bartholomew, who spoke to us about, they shared their insight on latest development around Nigeria's phase 2 elections. We'll continue to keep an eye on how things unfold in the next week here on News Central Television. But that'll be it this week from us on Village Square Africa. We'll see you again same time here on Monday. My name is Kemini Amano. Stay safe. Bye-bye.